Welcome to Torah Andalus. This is class 66 on the golden doves. Um, we're going through some difficult material, but I encourage you to make the effort because these, one of the problems when people study Torah but they don't have Chokhmah is that they process the Torah through a primitive type of Chokhmah. And when you process the Torah through a primitive type of Chokhmah, not surprisingly, um, you don't always understand what it is that the Torah is saying. So it's so important to develop the Chokhmah in accordance with the thinking of the Hachamim. And there are times where Chokhmah b'goyim ta'amen. There are times where the goyim themselves, many times they're Jews actually, develop certain ideas that the Hachamim already discussed centuries before. So one of the things I love about the Golden Doves, it is a difficult book, admittedly so, but it's a book that helps us develop an intelligence, a rabbinic intelligence, through which we can process the Torah in a Jewish way, right? It's very important. So we're on page 31 of the Golden Doves, and it's difficult. We're studying the difference between successive and simultaneous synthesis. Roman Jacobson. Roman Jacobson examined the nature of auditory and visual signs in relation to the two types of synthesis mentioned above. So there are auditory signs, which are signs that you hear, and then the brain processes the sign that it heard, and it gives it interpretation. So if I say the word hamor, your brain automatically takes the sound of the word hamor and it transforms it into the actual hamor that's in your mind, right? That you're thinking of. Then there's visual signs. So in a visual sign, for example, you will see a hieroglyphic representation of a hamor, right? And there the eye sees and the brain processes the information differently, right? And that's what Roman Jacobson does. He examines these two types of synthesis. He observed that although visual and auditory signs occur in time and space, obviously when you see a visual sign, there's going to be over the time axis, you're going to see it, your eyes will see it, it'll register in the brain, and then the sign will be processed, right? And so, of course, with auditory. So they occur in time and space, right? The spatial dimension takes priority for visual signs and the temporal one for auditory signs. So the chidush of Roman Jacobson is that when you're processing a visual sign, what's most important to the parts of the brain that are like sparking, or the neural pathways that are being used, is those parts that have to do with processing space, right? So processing space is one of the incredible things that the human brain does. By the way, artificial intelligence, one of the challenges with artificial intelligence, I may have said this previously, is teaching the robot or whatever the thinking entity is to understand relationships in space. That's an incredible feat. So anyway, when you see a visual sign, you're using that part of the brain that has to do with space. And the temporal ones for auditory signs. But the chidush is that when it's an auditory sign, such as speech, those parts of the brain that have to do with the passage of time are activated. The spatial and temporal. It says the spatial and temporary, but I think it means the temporal dimensions, right? So the spatial and temporal dimensions, and I'm just going to make a note in my book. It's for the future editions that just see temporal, right? So the spatial and temporal dimensions affect respectively the very structure of visual and auditory signs. So the way the visual sign is structured and the way the auditory sign is structured, one is structured in space, right? So your mind knows how to see the top of the symbol, the middle of the symbol, the bottom of the symbol, put it together, synthesize it, and then it sees the entire symbol and it processes it as a, in this case, hamor we said, or the temporal sign, right? So the auditory sign. It processes, puts together fragments of time, right? And together you have the auditory sign, right? And here recording. A complex visual sign involves a series of simultaneous constituents, while a complex auditory sign consists as a rule of serial successive constituents. Now, the reason that in the case of a visual sign, that the space element or the space processing of the brain is so important is because the visual sign is there. It's not changing, it's there in front of the person. He's looking out into space, and that part of the brain that knows how to put together different things in space is what's activating and allowing the person to process the sign, to see it, right? On the other hand, in the case of an auditory sign, Jack and Jill ran up the hill, right? You didn't know what I was going to say. Well, actually, you did, because you may have heard this in the past, right? I could have just easily said, Jack and Jill ate a tuna sandwich, right? So that you didn't know what I was going to say. But then at the end, you put it all together. So you're taking discrete fragments of the entire sign or the sentence, which those fragments exist in discrete moments in time, and you're putting it together. You see that? Whereas the components of the visual image produce a continuous and enduring structure, because when you're looking, it's always there, right? So it endures. That's the structure of the visual image. Processes an integrated spatial unit, and then your brain processes all the things. So if you see a painting, if your brain is functioning well, you can look at the painting and you see a beautiful painting of, let's say, lily pads in a pond, right? So your brain knows how to process the different lily pads and process the fact that it's a pond. It's not everybody has the ability. I mean, people, chas v'shalom, who are have problems, for example, processing the spatial, may not be able to understand the painting, right? Because they just can't see it. They can put together the different elements. In contrast, the components of auditory sensation produce a serial and discrete structure, processes an artificial and temporal unit. In the case of hearing, signs that have to do with hearing, like a sentence, right? So the discrete components of the sentence, they're structured obviously according to the time axis, and your brain has the ability to put together those discrete components even though they no longer exist, right? So that's again, not everybody has that ability. I mean, people naturally have that ability. I say naturally, I mean God, of course. But the point being that if somebody's brain is damaged, chas v'shalom, he may not have that ability. Whereas the components of the visual image, we said that, I'm sorry. These structures are the function of simultaneous and successive synthesis. So we have the visual structure, which exists in space as a continuum, and your brain just needs to know how to put together the picture. And you have the auditory structure, which exists in time. So one is called simultaneous synthesis, because the brain is looking simultaneously at the entire symbol. And successive synthesis has to do with hearing, because there's a succession of symbols, symbol in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. When I say in, out, I mean you see Jack, that's in, then it stops, it's out. And Jill ran up the hill, right? Or ate a tuna sandwich. And here recording Roman Jacobson again, I believe. When the observer arrives at the simultaneous synthesis, they contemplated painting. The painting as a whole remains before his eyes. So you look at the painting, and at first you don't understand what you're looking at. It could be Picasso's The Guitarist. And then you put it together, and then you understand that these are different frames of a guitarist. Right? Now, when your mind does that, the painting is still present. It is still present, right? But when the listener reaches a synthesis of what he has heard, the phonemes, I misread that. I mispronounced that. The phonemes have in fact already vanished. In contrast, when there's a sentence, so the words, you're not hearing them anymore. Your brain is remembering the words and putting them together in the right order, because the brain has the ability to successively synthesize the words, right? But some people don't have that successive synthesis ability, and instead of Torah Sivilanu Moshe, they'll mumble, the order of the reading. That's why, for example, because instead of going successive synthesis, you're improperly synthesizing the sentences, right? Not in accordance with the timeline. That's right. So also like, they survive as mere after images, right? The words survive, but they're not really there. They're just kind of like in the brain, some sort of after image, somewhat abridged reminiscences, right? There's a memory of what you heard, and it's an abridged memory, of course, because you never have perfect memory of every single intonation and every single pause, right? And this creates an essential difference between the two types of perception and percepts, right? So that's the difference between successive and simultaneous synthesis. And the Torah, obviously, I was aware of it. I rather say the other way around. Roman Jacobson was aware of what, of course, the Torah knew, because Hashem created us, right? The hierarchical structure characteristic of verbal organization is necessitated by the ephemeral nature of its components. Right? So now, because the mind needs to remember what it heard, and as it's remembering what it heard, it needs to put together the discrete components of the sentence. It has to put them together and then synthesize them into a meaning. There has to be some sort of hierarchy in what the mind remembers and what the mind, so to speak, emphasizes. The artificial organization of language is in fact an essential condition of successive integration, right? And that's why you have a certain hierarchy in language. It's an artificial hierarchy, but that's what allows us to remember and process and synthesize, right? So for example, Jack and Jill ran up the hill to find a tuna sandwich that they later on ate, right? So the point is, you remember there's a Jack, you remember there's a Jill, they're the subjects, you remember there's a hill and there's a tuna sandwich, those are the two objects, right? So there's a certain hierarchy. Remember, it's Jack and Jill ran up the hill, or did they, so that's ran is verb, that's a slightly lower, right? Two is the lowest on the hierarchical scale, right? The brain kind of has to remember what it needs to remember in order to synthesize and derive meaning, right? So there's an artificial hierarchy of words, right? For this reason, unlike the components of visual perception, which appear in a natural, that is spatial and unorganized state. So when you have a painting, right, there's a natural flow. You don't have to have hierarchy, an artificial hierarchy, because it's not necessary. The painting is there in front of you. There's no need to remember. You can just look at it, and as you're looking, the image unfolds in your brain. Okay. Right? The components of auditory perception need to be organized into artificial, highly stratified structures, and that's why you need to have the structures of language, the syntax of language, the different parts of the speech that your brain needs to knows how to put together. Right? As mentioned before, auditory perception also involves simultaneous synthesis, and this is an important point. So now you know the difference between simultaneous synthesis for paintings and successive synthesis for sentences of speech. We're not saying that when you put together a sentence in your mind that there is no spatial component of the brain at work. No, that's incorrect. And we're also not saying that when you look at a beautiful painting that there is no temporal component of the brain at work. That's incorrect. It's just that they're subordinate as a matter of what the task is. If the task is visual, then the temporal will be subordinate to the visual, whereas if the sentence is auditory, then the visual will be subordinate to the auditory, to the successive, right? The simultaneous synthesis will be subordinate to the spatial synthesis will be subordinate to the temporal. Right? As mentioned before, auditory perception also involves simultaneous synthesis, right? So also in auditory perception, there is an element, subordinate of simultaneous synthesis. There are auditory components, such as chords and polyphony in music. So for example, when you have chords on the piano, so you're playing a couple things at the same time. So that simultaneous synthesis, you hear these harmonic tones because your brain is synthesizing two tones being played, or maybe more than two tones being played at the same time, and your brain synthesizes it. That's simultaneous synthesis. I think polyphonic means when you have like a few melodies at the same time, like, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, merrily, and they're singing merrily, merrily. Somebody else is singing row, row, row your boat, right? I believe that's what's meant here by polyphony. Nevertheless, and I apologize for my poor rendition of row, row, row your boat. I apologize especially to the British who might be watching this video. But the point is that your brain uses a simultaneous function in order to process these harmonics, designed to express some simultaneity. So you have that also in sound, right? You have in sound, you also have the simultaneous aspect of processing. Accordingly, there are two axes to auditory perception. A principal axis involving successive synthesis. Therefore, to summarize, in the auditory perception of the human mind and in auditory sounds, the principal axis or the principal processing power is done through successive synthesis. But, and a secondary axis involving simultaneous synthesis, as for example in the case of harmonics. Jacobson's view concerning the visual and auditory processes may be summarized as follows, and this is a summary of a quote as well from Jacobson. Within the systems of auditory signs, never space, but only time acts as a structural factor, right? So the language is structured in time. That's why also, not just language, music is structured in time. That's why rhythm is so important. There's a white space, which is where the music is heard, but then there's the black space, which is the pauses. So a piano player who is proficient knows how to manipulate the black space. And it's the black space oftentimes that makes the music beautiful, right? So that's time. The black space is knowing how to manipulate time. So you have, namely, time and its two axes, sequence and simultaneity. So it's never space, even when it's simultaneous synthesis, it's time. You have sequence, right? Dun, 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 dun. And simultaneity, where you have the two things playing together. Right? So it's not that there's space in the auditory, it's time. The structuration of visual signatia signs, right, necessarily involves space, but in contrast, if it's a painting, if it's a visual, it's all about space and can either be abstracted from time, as in an immobile painting and sculpture, and therefore time is irrelevant. You could just abstract what you saw and it exists statically, a painting or a sculpture. Or superinduce the time factor, as in the motion picture. In the motion picture, you have visual images which are superinduced, where time is superinduced upon those visual images, so that you have an element there of successive synthesis. End of quote. Greek thinking, says my father, is organized in terms of simultaneous synthesis and visual experience. For the Greek mind, the most important thing is, and for the American mind, and everything is just visual, right? I mean, it's become absurd. The United States is just obsessed with visual. I mean, we no longer care about people's merits. We care about their skin color, and things like that. I mean, things that are actually racist in the extreme. But that's what this Greek thinking leads to, right? Hebrew thought is mainly auditory. In Hebrew thought, we want to, it's funny, sometimes we have rabbis coming into the synagogue, and I show respect to everybody, and it's so important to have derech for everybody. But I don't care how they look so much. I mean, it's important. Obviously, you should be well dressed and clean and, well groomed. But I'm interested in what they have to say. Till the rabbi opens his mouth, I'm not impressed, right? When he opens his mouth, I either become impressed, very impressed, or very unimpressed. Hebrew thought is mainly auditory and therefore organized in terms of successive synthesis. So all of Hebrew thinking is organized in terms of successive synthesis. So if you don't have successive synthesis as a main function in your thinking, you won't be able to understand the Torah, right? That's so important. I mean, just think about that for a moment. Processing the Torah through Greek modes of thinking is what everybody seems to be doing, or most people seem to be doing. It's very rare to have a person processing Torah, processing mitzvot through successive synthesis, because we're all engulfed in the Western world. That's why I teach the Kuzari. That's why I study the Kuzari. I study the Moreh Nebuchim. I study the old Sephardim, especially from Andalusia, because it's only through them that we are free from the Western modes of thinking, and we have the ability to see the Torah through the Torah mode of thinking.